This week we're going to be starting exercise 2. We're going back to revisit the geometric shapes because they're extremely important in terms of shadow mapping and drawing anything at all. And we're going to use a freehand method this time. So when you hand this in, everything that you draw will be done without a ruler. Last week we used a ruler, this time we aren't. The reason for that is that we need to home stage our drawings. And by that I mean you're going to be putting little items all around your spaces in order to make them look more beautiful, to set an atmosphere, to set a tone. In doing that, they're tiny, but very significant little elements. So you won't be drawing a 2-point perspective box particularly, or a 1-point perspective box, the way you will for the larger pieces in the room, the larger pieces of furniture. These will often not be even at the same 2-point perspective as the room itself. To make them more interesting, to make the whole room more interesting and more activated. This is the first part of exercise 2, and you can see it's all done very much freehand, but with an understanding of perspective. So the cube should look like an equal-sided box. So remember, use less than half the width for the depth, that the receding planes, the receding sides of the box, this side and the top of the box, appeared to meet in the distance, which would be the vanishing point in the eye level if we could afford to put them in. So you're anticipating that. And this side, you can see it's receding as well. And those lines would eventually meet at the same place that these lines do. With the sphere, it's just a matter of doing a gesture until you get it right. Now this is our underdrawing. We're going to put a piece of marker paper over top and render these in gray marker next week. But for this week, get the best circle that you possibly can. And the cone, now to make your ellipses, remember that you leave more depth at the front of the ellipse and less depth at the back. More depth at the front of the ellipse and less at the back. You see this everywhere. This should be done everywhere. But it's all based on this line. With the cone and the cylinder, their symmetry is extremely important. That when you look side to side, so if you draw your vertical line up, your center, to get everything symmetrical, you're looking side to side. Is this distance here the same on both sides? Is this distance the same at the same point on the other side? So you do your best. We can use construction lines. This is our underdrawing, remember. It's not our final. We can keep correcting it with our pen, our ballpoint pen, until we get it just right. And the cylinder, the same thing. I don't have the center line up here. I really should. It would really help. Now leave all your construction lines on, just as I have here. Now, this was an attempt at a table line. I think I need to attempt that again. That's a little bit crooked. So, or maybe it's a little round. That's okay too. But if you want it straight, it should be straight. We're using our memory of our shadows that we drew in exercise 1 to map these shadows. We know how to do this now, so we just put this into play and practice it. But it's all freehand, and from memory, you're remembering how you achieved your shadows with exercise 1, and now you're putting it into practice. Again, the reason for that is that when you homestage your drawings, you have little elements that you need to put in that aren't going to be big enough to fit into a box. And there is a point in a perspective drawing that you have so many lines that adding even more is not going to be helpful. So if you can do it in an abbreviated yet effective way that obeys the laws of perspective, the perspective of your room, all of these items are very much below eye level. You can tell that because you're seeing the tops of the box, the top of the cylinder, the opening of the ellipses. They open this way and not the other way. This is the back line, not the front line. If you do an optical illusion here, If that were the front line and this were the back line, that would tell you that this is above eye level, but it's not. And so this line would actually be hidden, but because this is our underdrawing, we need to get it in there. We need to see through these objects in order to see that they're correct. It would also have helped if I had done the same here. I would suggest that you do that. Draw the underlying drawing lines here as well to make sure that your box is behaving as it should behave. Now, this step will be done in our first week. We'll focus on that. Now, we're preparing the way for using our markers. And as you know, our markers come as a grayscale, and each one of them has a percentage associated with the darkness or lightness of the ink. We're also using the white of the paper as our highlight, and our next value down is a 10% cool gray, and the next value down is our 30% cool gray. And then you see, we repeat the 30% again in the halftone, which is the area between the light and the shadow. And we repeat it so that we can blend it with the 50. So you'll understand when we do that next week how this should go. But this is your architectural lettering coming back here now, and we're mapping this all out. If you're having difficulty working in the sketchbook, take your paper out and work on a flat desk. There's a perforated line on the page that you can gently pull the paper out, maybe fold it back there on that line and pull it out, and then just tape it back in with that little piece of paper that's left over. Just tape it back in when you're done. Because these initial diagrams, last week and this week, you'll be using them for all of your rendering classes. You'll go back and look at them and use them to advise you, to help you do what you're doing later on in a more advanced stage. These are our basic ideas that we need to keep active all the time. Now the shadow, we're going much darker. We're using the 50 and the 70. We're going to be using a blending technique. So that's why it's so important that we have these mapped out in this way. It's important that you have one marker step, one percentage left out between each of your values. So we use a 10 and a 30, not a 10 and a 20. There isn't enough difference between the two to make this work. And you'll understand that better when we do this next week, when we do that part of it next week. Please do these warm-up exercises. They'll really help to get your hand and your eye coordination going before you tackle your drawing. So these are the best warm-up exercises for you to do this week. Let's take a look at our document now. You saw the chart that we're making. The diagram we're making is the marker value plan. And you're going to hand in both your line drawing as well as your full page of renderings. Now this is the second part that we're going to go over next week. If you don't have the kit, the markers that you may buy could be very similar, just not the same brand. For example, if you choose Copic markers, they number them. So our 10% in Prismacolor would be a 1 in a Copic marker. Just make sure you get the cool grays. The warm grays and French grays, they tend toward a particular color, and it's a little bit misleading trying to match what I'm showing you to something that's so colorful. I'm assigning it week 3, and it's going to be both the line drawing that we're working on this week and the rendering that we're working on next week, week 4, are going to be due in the Dropbox for exercise 2 at 10 p.m. week 5. Now 10 p.m. Toronto time, my time. Remember that the Dropbox, it shows me the exact day and time that you put your submission in. So please be careful. I don't want to mark anyone's work late. And this whole project, parts 1 and 2, are worth 15%. You aren't obliged to do the warm-up exercises, but I don't really see how you can do this well especially those that have never drawn before, if you don't do the warm-up exercises, then you'll have a more deeper understanding, a richer understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it. In our learning outcomes, the most important thing, I think, is about home staging and the importance of it, the real importance of it, how you need to be able to sketch those items in when your perspective drawing is so busy that you just want to set something in there without too much bother, too much trouble, and you pull on all of your resources, your understanding of perspective and so on, to get them in there. You don't ever want to leave those out. Now this first week, you just need your ballpoint pen for sketching your items and a page from your sketchbook, 11 by 14 inch page from your sketchbook. When next week, we're going to need some marker paper because we're going to practice our rendering with our gray markers next week, week 4. Bring those along. The videos, I've got all the videos up. I showed you the ones that apply for this week to this week. And next week, there's another one, a warm-up exercise that I've given you a template for, but we'll look at that next week. Remember to listen to them as you work on them so that you're not just copying what you see. You won't have a deep enough understanding. And you're creating your chart freehand as shown, utilizing your best architectural lettering for your labeling. Something to notice, and I can't repeat this often enough, but when you begin to use your Bienfeng marker paper, when we start rendering, we use the back of that paper. The front of that paper is treated with something that is meant to keep the markers from bleeding underneath. They do anyway, and this just interferes with how well the markers look on the paper. They look better on the back of the paper. So we'll talk about that again next week, but I can't say it often enough. The .07 pigment liner pen in your little set of pigment liners is great to use. It doesn't bleed when you put marker over it on marker paper. On bond paper, on just ordinary printer paper or ordinary drawing paper, it won't bleed, but ordinary bond and sketchbook paper will soak up all the ink in your markers. And the 10% and the 30%, they dry out really fast because they're mostly alcohol and very little pigment. So we want to preserve them as best we can. You keep them in the fridge if you can in between, and always make sure you click them. Hear a click when you close them, just in case you get tempted to try them out this week. If you get tempted to try them this week, use some of your marker paper. Don't render on the bond paper. This one and all of them on our Prismacolors, look for the skinny line, and you'll see that this is a cool gray 30%. It's tiny, it's hard to find. I don't know why they make them so small, but this is how you figure out just what's inside this marker. These can be misleading, so I don't really go by them. I go by the number, the percentage. And we'll talk more about rendering next week. You're going to have one PDF file. Now you have 2 drawings, a line drawing and a marker rendering. You're going to need to make 2 photographs and combine them into one PDF file. A lot of people find it easy to do that in PowerPoint. Some like to use Cam Scanner, but you have to go into your computer, whatever software you're using, and find out exactly how to do that with what you have. Have a look at what you're sending before you send it. PDFs are the only thing that I can read on that platform. So please just send PDFs. Otherwise your work will be late, and I really don't want to mark your work late. And if I can't see it, I'm going to ask you to rephotograph it, and it will be late. I can't mark it if I can't see it, so just be careful. In the drawing, we're looking to see that you're exhibiting your understanding so far of perspective, and you're able to do what I was showing you with the cube, for example, showing that as it recedes in space, it appears to get smaller. Looking for symmetry, make sure you're using your symmetry, and that it's all done freehand. You haven't used your ruler. Watch to see that you fill the page. We don't want any little tiny objects on there. We want to fill the page dynamically. Every time you make a drawing, you want to think about how would it look as a presentation piece. Even if you are drawing by hand, you want to do that. We want black ink, always include a border, and your title areas. It's worth 15% of your final grade. Now, in terms of the actual evaluation, this is the paper that I'm going to be uploading to assessments assignments so that you can read your feedback and find your grade. And this time, because we're marking out of 15, 0 out of 6 this time is not a pass, of course. It probably means that your work was perhaps incomplete, or it doesn't show that you understand perspective. It doesn't show that you understand the shadow mapping, or that you're not understanding about ellipses. If you're at 7 to 9, then you're just out of 50%, a little bit more. You understand most of it. Perhaps your verticals aren't straight, or you understand how to draw the objects, you don't understand how to shadow them, or you do most of them, but maybe 1 or 2 of them are a little off in terms of how you shadow map them. If you have an 8 to a 12, then you've done well. You've demonstrated that you not only know how to draw these items, but you also know how to map their shadows. But perhaps the lines aren't all straight, or your symmetry may be off here and there. Little more room for improvement. And lastly, everything looks beautiful. You've balanced your page. You've drawn everything in such a way that it's freehand but very accurate as it can be. You understand how to do perspective to indicate that, as well as to shadow map. And that little bit between a 13 and a 15, where it's just rather stunning, very impressive in terms of how you've used the page. And that comes when you've usually had a lot of experience of drawing, that you get that, but not always. If you just plow away, do all the warm-up exercises, even if you've never drawn before, I've seen people get a full 15 out of 15 because they're persistent. They do a lot of practice on their own. If drawing is new to you, what we're doing in class is not enough. You need to do all the warm-up exercises and maybe even a little more than that in order to really catch up in your drawing. That's the thing about drawing. You only learn to draw through drawing. Your understanding only arrives through discovery. Talking about it and watching it, it's not going to do it. You need to have aha moments. Okay, now I see what that means. Now I see what line was missing. Now I see what order I should go in. We all have preconceived notions, and they just get in the way of being taught something. And you have to surmount those. And that's how it happens, just drawing over and over again. And again, now when we're evaluating this, we want to look for the correct use of sketching techniques, understanding of perspective, understanding of shadow mapping, getting your symmetrical geometric shapes in order, and not using a ruler, being accurate without one. Your ellipses, remember, there's more depth at the front half of the ellipse and less at the back. Also, don't make your ellipses pointy at the outermost parts. No matter how shallow they are always rounded. We're looking to see you worked from the videos. Does your work resemble what you were given? Are you working large enough? There's got to be some flexibility there. Some of us see shadows as being quite large. Some of them like them small. They don't like them too large, but as long as they're consistent, as long as your objects are large enough and the shadows are in the correct position, there's some room for flexibility there. Everything is in black ballpoint pen for your impact of your lines. This is for the line drawing only. This is what we're concerned with this week. The direction of the lighting that we're using is from above, from in front, and from the left. That's where our cast shadows are to the right. So please follow that same idea in your drawing as well. These items are about the rendering next week. Your form shadows will come next week when we talk about rendering. The cast shadows are this week, so we're drawing those correctly this week. And when we render them, I'll be showing you how to do that. Gradual value changes will come up next week when we look at rendering with the gray markers. And when you map shadows on your rendering, you don't put them in ink the way we're doing this week with our line drawing. You use a gray marker, a 30% gray marker, because shadows aren't outlined. You don't see them. If you look around the room, you'll see they're very, very transparent. They're amorphous, and you can put your hand right through them. They're not solid, so we don't outline them. And then, of course, our presentation standards, that everything looks beautiful.